Laura Harper was the kind of woman who thrived on structure. Her life was an intricately woven tapestry of color-coded calendars, to-do lists, and carefully planned schedules. As a professional event planner, she was renowned for her ability to transform chaos into order. But as the sun blazed down on the small coastal town of Seaside, she found herself facing her biggest challenge yet: organizing the town's annual 4th of July festival. Laura had recently moved to Seaside from New York City, seeking a change of pace after a particularly grueling year. She imagined the town's charming streets and picturesque beaches would provide the perfect backdrop for a fresh start. But as she stood in the middle of the town square, surrounded by half-assembled stalls and tangled strings of lights, she couldn't help but feel a wave of doubt. Joshua Sullivan, on the other hand, was the antithesis of Laura's meticulous nature. He had spent the past decade traveling the world as a freelance photographer, capturing breathtaking landscapes and spontaneous moments. Joshua had returned to Seaside to visit his grandmother and perhaps to figure out what his next adventure might be. He was a man who lived in the moment, guided by instinct and a thirst for the unknown. Their paths first crossed one sultry afternoon under circumstances that could only be described as serendipitous. Laura was wrestling with a particularly stubborn canopy that refused to stay upright. Her hair, usually tied back in a neat ponytail, had started to escape in wisps that stuck to her forehead. Sweat trickled down her neck as she muttered under her breath, trying to coax the rebellious structure into submission. Joshua, who had been wandering the town with his camera in hand, was drawn to the scene. There was something inherently amusing about watching this determined woman battle a tent in the sweltering heat. He raised his camera and snapped a few candid shots, capturing her fierce expression and the comical nature of her predicament. Laura finally managed to secure the canopy and stood back to admire her handiwork. It was then she noticed Joshua, leaning against a nearby lamppost with a bemused smile. She wiped her brow with the back of her hand and gave him a questioning look, which only made his grin widen. Without a word, he tipped an imaginary hat and continued on his way, leaving Laura both perplexed and intrigued. As the days went by, their encounters became more frequent. Laura would be supervising the setup of the fireworks display, and Joshua would appear out of nowhere, offering unsolicited and often unhelpful advice. She would be arranging flowers for the town's parade float, and there he would be, capturing the moment with his ever-present camera. Each interaction was marked by a mix of irritation and amusement, a dance of opposites that neither fully understood. One morning, as Laura was conducting a final inspection of the town square, she found herself in need of a ladder. The maintenance crew was nowhere to be found, and time was running out. As if on cue, Joshua appeared, whistling a tune and carrying a ladder over his shoulder. He offered it to her with a flourish, a twinkle in his eye that suggested he enjoyed playing the role of her unexpected savior. Laura accepted the ladder with a reluctant smile, climbing up to adjust a string of lights. From her vantage point, she could see Joshua below, snapping pictures of her as she worked. She pretended to be annoyed, but a small part of her couldn't help but enjoy the attention. There was something disarming about his carefree attitude, a stark contrast to her own tightly wound nature. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and cast a golden glow over the town, Laura found herself at the local diner, going over her plans for the festival. She was so engrossed in her work that she didn't notice Joshua slide into the booth across from her. He reached over and gently closed her laptop, forcing her to look up. For a moment, they simply stared at each other. Joshua's eyes held a mischievous glint, while Laura's were filled with a mix of surprise and curiosity. He gestured to the view outside, where the sky was painted in shades of pink and orange. It was a perfect summer evening, and Joshua seemed determined to make her appreciate it. Reluctantly, Laura allowed herself to be drawn into conversation. Joshua talked about his travels, regaling her with tales of far-flung places and daring escapades. Laura shared stories of her career, describing the joy she found in creating order from chaos. Despite their differences, there was an undeniable connection, a sense that they were two sides of the same coin. As the 4th of July drew closer, the town of Seaside buzzed with anticipation. Laura threw herself into her work with renewed vigor, determined to make the festival a success. Joshua, meanwhile, continued to shadow her, capturing the preparations through his lens and offering his unique brand of support. Despite the hectic pace, Laura found herself looking forward to their encounters. Joshua's presence was a welcome distraction, a reminder to enjoy the journey rather than just the destination. For Joshua, Laura represented a challenge, a puzzle to be solved. He was fascinated by her dedication and intrigued by the glimpses of vulnerability he occasionally glimpsed beneath her professional facade. The stage was set for a celebration like no other, a night of fireworks and festivities that promised to be unforgettable. Little did they know, their own personal fireworks were about to ignite, setting the scene for a romantic comedy filled with humor, heart, and a touch of adventure. The festival preparations were in full swing, and the town square was a hive of activity. Laura's meticulous planning had paid off, and everything was coming together beautifully. She was in her element, darting from one task to another, ensuring that every detail was perfect. Joshua was never far behind, capturing the energy and excitement through his camera lens. One afternoon, Laura found herself at the local park, overseeing the installation of a vintage Ferris wheel. It was a centerpiece of the festival, a nostalgic nod to simpler times. As she directed the workers, Joshua wandered over, drawn by the sight of the towering structure. "Need any help?" he asked, his voice tinged with playful sarcasm. Laura shot him a look, but couldn't suppress a smile. Despite her initial reservations, she had grown to appreciate his presence. There was something reassuring about having him around, even if he did have a knack for showing up at the most inconvenient moments. "Actually, yes," she replied, surprising herself. She pointed to a stack of colorful pennants that needed to be strung around the Ferris wheel. Joshua raised an eyebrow, but complied, taking the pennants and climbing up to attach them. As they worked side by side, an easy camaraderie developed. They bantered back and forth, Joshua teasing Laura about her perfectionism, and Laura playfully mocking his carefree attitude. There was a chemistry between them, a magnetic pull that neither could ignore. As the sun began to set, casting a warm glow over the park, Joshua climbed down and joined Laura on a nearby bench. They sat in comfortable silence, watching as the workers completed the final touches. The Ferris wheel stood tall against the darkening sky, its lights twinkling like stars. Laura found herself relaxing in Joshua's presence, the weight of her responsibilities momentarily forgotten. Joshua, for his part, was captivated by the sight of Laura at ease, her usual tension replaced by a rare sense of contentment. The next day, the festival kicked off with a grand parade. The streets were lined with cheering spectators, and the air was filled with the sounds of marching bands and laughter. Laura darted around, making sure everything ran smoothly, while Joshua captured the joy and excitement on film. As the day turned into evening, the town square transformed into a bustling carnival. There were games, food stalls, and live music, all leading up to the grand fireworks display. Laura was in the thick of it, her organizational skills put to the ultimate test. Joshua found her near the main stage, coordinating the final performances. He had been photographing the festivities all day, but now he wanted a break. He suggested they take a ride on the Ferris wheel, a chance to see the festival from a different perspective. Laura hesitated, her mind filled with a million things that still needed to be done. But something in Joshua's eyes convinced her to take a moment for herself. She agreed, and they made their way to the Ferris wheel, slipping into one of the colorful cars. As the wheel slowly turned, lifting them high above the town, Laura felt a sense of exhilaration. The view was breathtaking, the twinkling lights of the festival stretching out below them. Joshua sat beside her, his camera forgotten for once, simply enjoying the moment. They talked about their lives, their dreams, and their fears. Laura revealed her reasons for leaving New York, the burnout she had experienced, and her hopes for a fresh start. Joshua shared stories of his travels, the thrill of discovery, and the longing for a place to call home. There was an intimacy in their conversation, a vulnerability that brought them closer together. Laura found herself opening up in a way she hadn't in years, and Joshua felt a connection that went beyond the superficial. As the Ferris wheel reached its peak, they shared a moment of quiet reflection, gazing out at the twinkling lights and the dark expanse of the ocean beyond. The night culminated in a spectacular fireworks display. Laura and Joshua stood side by side, watching as the sky exploded in a riot of colors. The crowd oohed and ahed, but for Laura and Joshua, the real fireworks were the ones sparking between them. As the final bursts of light faded, Laura turned to Joshua, her heart pounding in her chest. There was a look in his eyes that made her breath catch. Without thinking, she leaned in and kissed him, a spontaneous act that felt both terrifying and exhilarating. Joshua responded immediately, wrapping his arms around her and pulling her close. The world seemed to fall away, leaving just the two of them in a bubble of their own making. It was a kiss, filled with promise, a declaration of the feelings that had been building between them. When they finally pulled apart, they were both breathless, their eyes locked in a shared understanding. The festival had brought them together, but it was their own connection that would keep them intertwined. They walked back to the town square, hand in hand, ready to face whatever came next, together. The days following the festival were a whirlwind of activity. Laura was busy wrapping up the event, dealing with vendors and handling post-festival logistics. Joshua, too, was caught up in his work, editing photos and preparing for an upcoming gallery exhibit. Despite their best intentions, the demands of their respective careers began to pull them apart. Laura was increasingly consumed by her responsibilities, the pressures of her job leaving little time for anything else. Joshua, meanwhile, was offered an exciting opportunity to photograph a wildlife expedition in Africa. It was a once-in-a-lifetime chance, one that he couldn't pass up. The timing, however, couldn't have been worse. They tried to make it work, stealing moments together when they could. But the distance, both physical and emotional, began to take its toll. Laura's fears and insecurities resurfaced, and she found herself questioning whether their connection was strong enough to withstand the challenges ahead. One evening, after a particularly stressful day, Laura and Joshua met at their favorite spot by the beach. The tension between them was palpable, each weighed down by their own worries. They sat in silence, the sound of the waves crashing against the shore a stark contrast to the turmoil in their hearts. Laura finally broke the silence, expressing her doubts and fears. She spoke of her need for stability, her fear of being left behind. Joshua listened, understanding her concerns but also feeling a sense of frustration. He wanted her to see that life was about taking risks, embracing the unknown. Their conversation grew heated, emotions running high. In the end, they both realized they were at an impasse. Joshua's adventurous spirit and Laura's need for order seemed irreconcilable. With heavy hearts, they decided to part ways, each needing time to figure out what they truly wanted. Joshua left for Africa, and Laura threw herself into her work, trying to fill the void he had left behind. The weeks turned into months, and life in Seaside moved on. But no matter how busy she kept herself, Laura couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. She missed Joshua's laughter, his spontaneity, the way he made her feel alive. Joshua, too, felt the loss keenly. As he traveled through the African wilderness, capturing stunning images of wildlife, he couldn't help but think of Laura. He missed her steadiness, her strength, the way she balanced his chaos. The distance gave him perspective, making him realize that adventure was meaningless without someone to share it with. As the 4th of July approached once again, the town of Seaside buzzed with anticipation. Laura was asked to organize the festival for a second year, and she agreed, though her heart wasn't fully in it. She went through the motions, her mind often drifting to thoughts of Joshua. One evening, while reviewing plans for the festival, Laura received an unexpected message. It was from Joshua, a simple email with a photo attached. The picture showed a stunning African sunset, the sky ablaze with colors. In the message, Joshua wrote about the beauty he had witnessed, but more importantly, he spoke of his realization that life's greatest adventure was finding someone to share it with. Laura's heart swelled with emotion. She read and reread the message, feeling a glimmer of hope. She replied, sharing her own reflections, her own journey of self-discovery. They began to exchange messages regularly, the distance between them shrinking with each word. As the festival day arrived, Laura found herself standing in the same spot where she and Joshua had first met. The town square was alive with activity, just as it had been a year ago. She felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness, her heart pounding in anticipation. As the sun set and the fireworks display began, Laura spotted a familiar figure weaving through the crowd. Joshua had returned, his camera slung over his shoulder, a determined look in his eyes. He made his way to her, their eyes locking across the square. Without a word, Joshua pulled her into his arms and kissed her, a kiss that spoke of longing, love, and the promise of a future together. The crowd around them cheered as the fireworks exploded in the sky, a fitting backdrop for their reunion. Laura and Joshua had found their way back to each other, their love stronger for the challenges they had faced. They knew that life wouldn't always be easy, but they were ready to face whatever came their way, hand in hand. The festival continued around them, a celebration of love, life, and the endless possibilities of the future. Thank you so much for listening to this short, romantic audiobook. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe to Love Stories Unplugged.